We've been joined by Dr. Kojo Pumpuni Asante, who is Director, Advocacy and Policy Engagement at CDD-Ghana. Dr. Kojo Asante, good morning and thank you very much for joining us.
Very good morning to you as well.
Great. So tell us, your assessment, CDD's assessment of President Mahama's first year in office.
Yeah, thank you very much. This assessment was done across about 6 thematic areas. So quite a lot of issues to look at broadly: democracy and governance, economy and jobs, environment, social development, foreign affairs, security, anti-corruption and accountability. So we really wanted to have a very sort of systematic assessment of how we were doing so far, after 1 year in office. You will recall that the Mahama administration inherited a very difficult situation, both in terms of our governance and our economy and our society. In terms of governance, you're talking about a situation not just in terms of sort of misgovernance, the usual issues like corruption and so on, but the idea that even the democratic experiment itself was under threat. If you look at the Afrobarometer surveys for 2024, which is probably one of the most damning ones we've done since 1999. You had, between 2017, satisfaction with democracy had dropped by almost 31 percentage points. So there was this sort of rapid questioning of whether democracy is delivering, and particularly among young people, to the extent that when people were asked in terms of whether they support military rule or military intervention when leaders abuse their power, almost 40% of adult Ghanaians were reporting this. So this was not just a question of just trying to govern well, but restoring faith in democracy, in our institutions, in our leaders who seem to promise a lot and then disappoint at the end. So I think that the burden on the president was that you needed to show to Ghanaians that you really were serious and you were going to depart from the past. So I think the reset agenda, or the framing of the challenge as a reset agenda, was actually appropriate for the times. And of course, the economy, I don't need to go over it, but the debt stress, the high inflation, the currency depreciation, and all of those things. So what we immediately identify as something that is positive was that the president signaled very early on that he understood the time that he was in. He understood the purpose for which he believed that Ghanaians had given him a very emphatic mandate, 56.6 above that. So if you recall, I think sometime in March or February or so, he had made the point that if he failed to basically, turn things around, reset our politics, our governance, our economy, and so on and so forth, he believed that we could be in a civil strife because the youth would not forgive him for spending this opportunity. So a lot of his signaling has been good. We know he set up the constitutional review to really, take an institutional sort of approach to how do you reset governance. We need to look at the foundational rules that we are using to govern everything in this country. He also, tried to restore confidence with broad civil society, citizens generally, with the media, and all of that. He really has sort of operated an open door policy. We've seen a number of cases where particular policies have been pushed, and then people have sort of given feedback that this is not in the right direction, like the lithium and other cases where he sort of reversed course and so on and so forth. So I think generally the signaling has been very, very, very positive. I think also positive is that his approach to on the anti-corruption side in terms of the code of conduct that he set up for his appointees, and really trying to hold the line. I mean, Ghanaians are very much concerned about the impunity that happens in government and the corruption that happens in government. But of course, we have had post-regime accountability before. This is not the first time. Anytime you get a change in government, the sitting government will go after the appointees of previous government. So those issues, but certainly this was one of the issues that was burning, and which sort of led up to oral and all of those things. And Ghanaians really are looking at that. But I think generally in terms of resetting the anti-corruption architecture, the new National Anti-Corruption Action Plan has yet to be adopted by Parliament, and so on. And you can go down the line if you take social development, for instance, in social protection, for if you take health, if you take education, if you take gender, there was a huge strain on financial reliability for just continuing programs, whether it's national health insurance, whether it is leave, whether it is, and I think we've seen at least some sort of restoration of the financing for some of these programs, just to bring some certainty and reliability to the process. And in the first year, I think that's commendable. In foreign affairs, we've seen that the president has been very, very active, aggressive, pursuing a number of policies. Definitely with his continued the good neighborliness sort of doctrine that we have had, since I think before time of him before, because of the particular location of Burkina Faso, the social ties, the historic ties, with and the terrorist threats and the other threats. We know just recently, unfortunately we lost some Ghanaians, tomato traders and so on in the close to the northern part of Burkina Faso.
Okay.
And he's also used Ghana's soft power in terms of culture, in terms of Pan-African solidarity, non-alignment, to really push and sort of assert Ghana's values, in terms of pushing a rule-based order. We've issued statements on Gaza, humanitarian issues. We've donated to Gaza and so on.
Okay.
So there's been, you can take, a whole swath of issues. So those are, I think, the positive.
What about the negatives?
So, what I think there are some of the issues that we've seen on some of the governance priorities. So, and I do have to also add that the size of government issue was also one of the priorities. Keeping it to 60 and all of that. But we are yet to see, for example, the report that the presidency has to submit to Parliament at the end of March about the presidential staffers. We notoriously got to about 1,000 or so in 2023. So we want to see whether or not, because the size of government is not just the reduction number of ministers and deputies, it's also about the entire cost of running the presidency, which sometimes has gone. So we yet to see the numbers for us to be able to make an assessment, also to really assess how much the presidency is spending, the Office of Government Machinery is spending. So those kinds of analysis still needs to be done on that. One of the areas that I would also flag is that we've seen some coordination problems with policy, to the extent that the Cabinet Secretary had to issue a directive that ministers should not be making policies on the fly when it's not been discussed, in cabinet and approved. Because there was a period where you were getting ministers sort of making statements that basically were sort of indicating policy positions of the government. We even had the situation where the majority leader and the chief whip, used a private members bill to try to repeal the OSP Act, and they had to take the presidency to call for it to be withdrawn, and so on and so forth. So there's been that coordination problem that really need to be fixed, because you see these policies have huge impact on us as citizens, and it is important that there is ample time and space for discussion and reflection and so on. Related to that, I would also say that when you take, for example, in Parliament, we have seen, one of the issues that people have raised concern about with the majority that the NDC had in Parliament, that was that people were worried that if they were not going to basically sort of push things through without scrutiny. And even though Parliament has to be commended for this, that the standing orders now really give the opposition a lot of checks. 14 committees are now chaired by opposition, including government assurances, budget, and judiciary and others, which allows the opposition to be able to put some scrutiny on what the majority is doing, regardless of the numbers. But one of the issues that we also flagged was the use of the certificate of urgency, and really basically rushing bills through. And if you see the time frame in which bills take in the last year, almost over 50% of that really were just done within a week. And then there's the use of the certificate of urgency in particular legislation like the regulation of Okada, the regulation of cryptocurrency, even the position of the 1 CD on petroleum products. These are very life impacting issues that should not be used in this way. So Parliament and the executive and the majority party, really they have a lot of influence in setting the rules and ensuring that in spite of the numbers, we really do need to make sure that there is scrutiny and enough public consultation and engagement around this. That's why I like some of the proposals from the CLC that we have to have a right of participation guaranteed in the Constitution in legislative processes. And it shouldn't be discretionary that happens. So those matters we have to talk about. I think in anti-corruption and accountability, we have to raise the issues of how, for example, the knowledge prosecution issues were dealt with.
What about those issues?
That discretion has to be properly regulated. That whether it has to be mandatory that all these processes has to be approved by a court of law to ensure that there will be some additional scrutiny, beyond what the Attorney General is able to do. Because if there's going to be legitimacy in the context of what we have experienced of post-regime accountability, once you have decisions making decisions related to people who are sympathetic to your party as opposed to others, there's always going to be a legitimacy deficit. So that is one area that we have to look at. And then, we've raised issues, I think, on the security side of things. We still are not resolving conflicts. The investment in preventative prevention of conflict is not there. So we keep spending money on trying to just contain conflicts. And the last, I think some of the figures that we saw, we were spending 6 million, I think, a month, and I'm sure it's probably more. We deployed, I think, over 400 soldiers or so to Boko. We deploy another 400. There are a number of where we are trying to, have security presence in this place. The cost of sustaining these things is not workable. We need to look at it very seriously. We need to understand what we are doing with the whole architecture of our security. There was this discussion yesterday about moving the name of NIB back to BNI. You know, we have to. The center's recommendation is that these architectural issues have to be resolved once and for all. The national security architecture or the coordinating role should not be turned into another security force. That was not what the Constitution meant the place to be. Because if you don't take care, what we have experienced in the Francophone countries where you have presidential guards and so on, we had that in Nkrumah's time and all of that stuff, that you then begin to hand over a unit of whatever to a president to control and all of those kinds of things. We really need to avoid that. It's a coordinating intelligence role that needs to be, captured that way. So I think we all have to pay attention to that. And of course, we should make sure now we have a defense minister, because the issues around defense, even when you begin to ask cybersecurity and all of those things, are massive. We are facing a real existential threat from all around us. So our defense, imperative is something that, and I don't think that both an interior minister also already has a lot of issues. And I talked about all these communal violence and conflict, even from Galamsey alone. So those matters have to. Foreign affairs, I think it's all about the coherence between our pragmatic approaches to dealing with Burkina and the Sahelian, but how do we also enhance regional integration? An ECOWAS that is losing, legitimacy. How can Ghana be a leader and the sort of moral, to bring the moral leadership to really get ECOWAS to reform, because it is in our interest to have an ECOWAS that actually is promoting values that we believe, democratic values that we believe, that transparency, good leadership, and all of that. We are doing that at the African continent. ECOWAS is critical because it's within our neighborhood. So there is a whole range of issues that we try to capture in the first day. I think, in summary, all I'll say is that for a first year, given where we were, what you wanted to see is what are the steps that are being taken, and whether the steps, signal to us that we are going in the right direction. The verdict basically is that yes, all the steps are good. We want to see how these actions and signals are really translated into something more systemic and clear, with a clear direction that we can all begin to track and say, okay, this is the destination we want to go. And, these are the indicators that we should watch out for as we go along it. Our job was to give early feedback on this, because for us, as I said, it's not just the issue about fixing some of the misgovernance and so on. The democracy project as it is now is really under threat. So this government has to succeed for Ghanaians if we are going to, not have serious reversals in our democratic history. So there is really no choice. We need to point out when things are not going well and point it out early enough for government to correct it.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Kojo Pumpuni Asante, Director, Policy Engagement and Partnerships at CDD-Ghana. We're very grateful. Do have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's Dr. Kojo Asante sharing his views. He's talked about what he believes are the positives and what are the negatives, Kojo.
Yeah, and one thing we have been talking about is the 24-hour economy. Mm-hmm. Yesterday, the president assented the bill, so now we have a law. Yeah. Unfortunately, I've not seen the full law yet, but now that we have a law, we hope that the grand vision of the 24-hour plus secretariat or authority, we start seeing implementation. Because if you've seen the whole document, it's a lot of big ticket items that can transform the economy. And personally, I think that even if 10% of what is captured in that document is achieved within the tenure of John Mahama, we are going to see our economy change drastically. So, yes, he spent a year in office. There are a lot of low-hanging fruits that we've missed out on, especially in agric. I think that if you look at Mahama's tenure, inflation is down, exchange rate has reduced and it's been a bit stable. There's a lot of goodwill, but one of the areas that we are seeing a lot of gains being lost is agriculture. And if 24-hour economy is also really built around agric to industrialization, if you don't do it right, there'll be a problem. And I'll give you a few examples. Now, we've seen the cocoa issue. Cashew is coming up. Shea nuts is coming up, so the tree crop space, right? Last year, mango farmers struggled. Some mango farmers struggled to sell. We saw the videos from Nkranza and other areas, right? So we need to see Ministry of Agric and Ministry of Trade actually translating a lot of the talk into action where we see value addition. And from here, I always say that value addition is not a medium to long-term strategy because of the way technology is available now. It's something, if we want transformative value addition and we throw the right financial resources behind whatever thing we want to do, within 6 months, we should have things running and turning economies around. Now, in the grain space, the current problem with rice farmers. In fact, yesterday when I went to the Crop Research Institute, we had a lot of conversations how they've spent a lot of time in working on improved rice varieties. And now our farmers have adopted these rice varieties. They've planted rice, but we allowed the import of a lot of cheap rice into the country. They cannot sell. There is no proper balance in allowing cheaper imports and also ensuring local production that can get to the market.
You know this bit about imports, particularly of rice. And yesterday I said something. I said something because on air, the fact that while we're talking about grains today, there's a lot of production of maize, but it's cheaper actually. Okay, it's cheaper to import yellow maize into the country and pay for it, use it to mix feed for pigs. So if you ask the people to go and get you maize, now yellow maize, by the time it gets to drop on a hole from the north, you're probably, with transport and everything, you're paying about 300 cedis. Meanwhile, you can get it in whole for 250, and this is actually imported. It's in whole for 250. Now, what I think we should do, now that we have, we should be buying more. The state can use its power to buy more from these farmers and get other institutions to buy.
But the state has told us they are buying, but who are they buying from? Where is the stock of what they are buying? The 200 million the president said was being spent on these things.
So when the state is done, after the schools have bought and everything, and we're able to produce enough, then you begin to use taxation. To say, if you're bringing from outside the country, you pay more taxes.
Exactly.
Which would discourage people. But if we do not if you're able to produce enough, and we go into that, what's going to happen to us is a fight back. So it's always appropriate when we are able to now encourage people to, produce more. And once we are self-sufficient, then we say, you know what, guys, enough. We're not going to take from, if you're bringing this into the country, then you have to pay more for it.
So the president and this government, they have a lot of goodwill, but the main foundational economic activity for the country is struggling. And anybody who is a keen watcher of the Greek economy will tell you that it is struggling. And if we don't see anything strategic and anything transformational done immediately, we'll be in trouble. This week we discussed tomatoes. And I want to ask the Ministry of Food and Agric, the tomato season is happening. Do we have inputs in the country, even to plant tomato this year? So let's move beyond the talk and do proper, sustainable implementation of the plans. Else next year, we'll be in trouble.